Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Michael Chen adjusted the weight of his radio on his belt for the third time in 10 minutes, the leather holster still feeling foreign against his hip. 3 months into the job, and he still felt like he was playing dress-up in someone else's uniform. The crisp October air carried the scent of dying leaves and pine needles, a smell he was beginning to associate with the constant knot of anxiety in his stomach. "You've got this," he told himself, checking his GPS coordinates against the worn trail map. Just another routine patrol. But the radio crackled to life, shattering his fragile confidence. "All units, we have a missing hiker reported on the Avalanche Lake Trail. 22-year-old female Megan Patterson. Last seen approximately 800 hours near the trailhead. Ranger Chen, you're closest to that location." "Copy." Michael's throat went dry. His first real emergency. "Copy. Dispatch. En route to Avalanche Lake Trail." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. The trail stretched ahead of him, a ribbon of packed earth disappearing into the golden cathedral of aspens. Each footstep seemed to echo louder than it should, the sound swallowed by trees that felt like they were watching. Michael had grown up in Phoenix. Endless suburban sprawl and strip malls. These ancient mountains made him feel insignificant, like an ant crawling across the face of something vast and indifferent. 20 minutes into his hike, he heard voices ahead. Through a gap in the trees, Michael spotted 2 figures on the trail. A young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail. She matched the description of Megan Patterson. She was talking animatedly with someone in a ranger uniform, but something made Michael pause behind a large Douglas fir. The other ranger looked familiar. Same height as his supervisor, Dave Morrison. Same weathered face and graying beard. Same worn Stetson hat. But Dave was supposed to be working the visitor center today, and there was something off about his movements. Too fluid, too deliberate. Like someone consciously thinking about each gesture. Michael squinted through the branches. The man's uniform looked perfect. Too perfect. Every crease sharp, every badge positioned exactly where it should be. Even Dave's typically rumpled appearance was somehow idealized, like a photograph of what a ranger should look like. "Just need to check your permits," the Dave that wasn't Dave was saying, his voice carrying that familiar Montana drawl but lacking the warmth Michael had come to associate with his boss. Megan was smiling, trusting. Why wouldn't she? The man looked exactly like a park ranger should look. Michael took a step forward, a branch snapping under his boot. Both figures turned toward the sound. The fake Dave's eyes met Michael's, and for just a moment, less than a heartbeat, his face was completely blank. Not confused or surprised. Blank, empty, like a computer screen between programs. Then the expression snapped back into place, friendly and professional. "Michael," the thing wearing Dave's face called out. "Perfect timing, just checking this young lady's backcountry permit." But Dave never called him Michael. Always Chen or Kid or Rookie, never his first name. Michael's hand instinctively moved to his radio, but he hesitated. What was he going to say? That his supervisor looked too much like his supervisor? That his smile was somehow wrong, despite being identical to the real one? "I've got her covered, Dave," Michael called back, his voice steadier than he felt. "Dispatch sent me to check on a missing hiker report." "Missing hiker?" Megan looked confused. "But I'm right here. I checked in at the trailhead this morning." The fake Dave's smile never wavered, but his eyes were watching Michael with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Must have been a miscommunication," not Dave said smoothly. "These things happen. Radio signals get crossed up here in the mountains." Michael knew that was bullshit. He'd spent 3 months learning their communication protocols. Dispatch didn't make mistakes like that. "Right," Michael said slowly. "Well, since I'm here, maybe I should escort Miss Patterson back to the trailhead. Make sure she gets there safely." "Actually," the thing said, still wearing Dave's face like a perfectly fitted mask. I was just telling Megan about a shortcut back to the main trail, much faster than backtracking. Why don't you head back to your patrol, Chen? I've got this handled. Chen. There it was, but delivered in a tone that was just slightly off. Too authoritative, like someone who'd studied recordings of Dave's voice, but missed the subtle warmth underneath. Michael's radio crackled. Ranger Chen, what's your status on the missing hiker? He keyed the mic, never taking his eyes off the fake Dave. Located and safe, escorting back to trailhead now. Copy that. Good work, Chen. The thing's smile faltered for just a moment. I told you, Michael, I've got this. Michael again. Michael said quietly. You called me Michael. Dave never calls me Michael. Megan looked between them, confusion turning to concern. Is everything okay? The air seemed to thicken, like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm. The fake Dave's face was still perfectly composed, but something behind his eyes had changed. Something hungry. You're making a mistake, rookie, it said. And now the voice was wrong too. Still Dave's vocal cords, but with an inflection that belonged to someone else entirely. Walk away. Michael's heart was hammering against his ribs. His mouth tasted like copper pennies. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to pretend he hadn't seen anything, to let whatever this was play out without him. But Megan was looking at him with growing fear, and he was wearing the badge. Rookie or not, he'd sworn an oath. Megan, he said carefully, I need you to walk toward me, slowly. What's happening? Her voice was small, confused. The thing wearing Dave's face tilted its head like a curious dog. You can't protect her, rookie. You don't even know what you're protecting her from. Maybe not, Michael said, his hand moving to the bear spray on his belt. But I know you're not Dave Morrison. The fake Dave laughed, and the sound was all wrong. Too many teeth, lasting a beat too long. How can you be so sure? Look at me, really look. Every line, every scar, every detail, I'm more Dave Morrison than Dave Morrison is. And it was true. Looking at the thing, Michael couldn't identify a single feature that was wrong. It was perfect. Too perfect. Like an HD photograph of Dave rather than the man himself. Because, Michael said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice, Dave's got a coffee stain on his left shirt pocket from this morning, and his left bootlace is frayed where it caught on a fence post last week. You look like Dave, but you look like Dave having the best day of his life, and Dave never has good days. He's too worried about everything that could go wrong in these mountains. The thing's perfect smile never wavered, but something shifted behind its eyes. Something that had been wearing Dave's face like a comfortable suit suddenly felt cramped, restricted. Clever boy, it said, and now the voice wasn't Dave's at all. It was older, rougher, like gravel in a cement mixer. But not clever enough. The air around them shimmered, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. Megan gasped and stumbled backward. The thing that had been Dave was changing, features sliding like melting wax, but not revealing whatever was underneath. Instead, it was becoming someone else entirely. Michael blinked, and suddenly he was looking at his own face. How about now, rookie? His own voice said from his own mouth in someone else's body. Still think you can tell the difference? Mid-story CTA. If this story is giving you chills, hit that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Michael's situation? Comment below. Michael staggered backward, his mind reeling. Looking at himself was like staring into a funhouse mirror that reflected too clearly. Every detail was perfect. The small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood fall. The way his hair never quite lay flat in the back. Even the coffee stain on his own uniform shirt that he'd somehow forgotten about. This isn't possible, he whispered. Isn't it? His own face said with his own voice, but twisted with an expression he'd never worn. In these old mountains, Michael, identity is just another costume to put on. Just another mask to wear. Megan was backing away from both of them now, her face pale with terror. Which one is real? The fake Michael laughed with his own laugh, but hearing it from outside his own body made his skin crawl. Good question. Michael, why don't you tell her who you are? Michael started, then stopped. Looking at his own face, hearing his own voice, he felt a sudden vertigo, as if the ground beneath his feet was tilting. I'm Michael Chen. I'm 24 years old. I graduated from Arizona State with a degree in environmental science. I've been working here for 3 months. Fascinating, his doppelganger said. I'm Michael Chen. I'm 24 years old. I graduated from Arizona State with a degree in environmental science. I've been working here for 3 months, so which one of us is lying? The world seemed to spin around him. Michael grabbed onto a nearby tree for support, the rough bark grounding him in something real and solid. You're not me. Prove it. Michael's mind raced. How do you prove you're yourself? What test could distinguish between the original and a perfect copy? Then he remembered. My girlfriend, he said quietly. Sarah. What's her middle name? His doppelganger smiled his own smile. Marie. Sarah Marie Hoffman. She's a veterinary student at Colorado State. She has a small scar on her chin from falling off her bike when she was 7. She likes her coffee with way too much sugar, and she snorts when she laughs really hard. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. The thing knew everything. Every memory, every private moment, every secret. But, Michael said, grasping for something, anything. What did I text her this morning? The fake Michael's smile faltered for just a moment. You texted her, you said? I didn't text her anything, Michael said, gaining confidence. Because my phone died last night and I forgot to charge it. Sarah's going to be pissed because I promised to check in with her during my lunch break. The doppelganger's face, his own face, contorted with something like rage. Clever, but ultimately pointless. Do you think knowing which of us is real will save you? Will save her? It gestured toward Megan, who was now pressed against a tree, tears streaming down her face. You want to know what I am, rookie? I'm what happens when the old stories wake up, when the legends that built these mountains remember they're hungry. Your people came here and named everything, cataloged everything, made maps and trails and visitor centers, but some things don't want to be mapped. The air around them grew thick and oppressive. The autumn sunlight filtering through the trees seemed to dim, though there were no clouds in the sky. I wear faces like you wear clothes, the thing continued, its features beginning to shift again. I've been the lost hiker who leads rescuers off cliffs, the helpful ranger who guides families into places they'll never leave, the friendly local who knows all the best secret spots. Michael's radio crackled with static. He tried to key the mic, but nothing happened. The device was dead, as if something had drained all the power from it. How many? Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. How many people have you lost count? The thing said casually. Decades of them. Centuries, maybe. Time moves differently in these mountains. But each one teaches me something new. Each face I wear becomes more perfect than the last. It was changing again, features flowing like water. For a moment, Michael caught a glimpse of something underneath, something that might have been human once, long ago, but had been worn smooth by time and hunger until only the shape remained. Please, Megan whispered. I just want to go home. The thing turned toward her, and now it was wearing the face of a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, a face that radiated maternal warmth and safety. Of course, honey, it said in a gentle, motherly voice. I know the way. I know these trails better than anyone. Come with me. And despite everything she'd just seen, despite the terror in her eyes, Megan took a step toward the creature. No! Michael lunged forward, grabbing Megan's arm. Don't listen to it! But his hand passed right through her. Michael stared at his hand in shock. Megan looked down at where he'd tried to grab her, confusion replacing fear. What's happening to me? Michael whispered. The thing wearing the kind woman's face laughed. Reality is fluid here, Michael. Identity is negotiable. You've been so focused on who's real and who's fake that you never stopped to consider whether any of us are real at all. The forest around them began to shift and blur, like a painting left out in the rain. Trees moved closer together, then farther apart. The trail beneath their feet wavered between packed earth and something that looked suspiciously like bone. "This is impossible," Michael said, but his voice sounded distant, even to himself. "Is it?" the creature asked. "You're a rookie, remember? New to these mountains. How can you be sure what's possible here and what isn't? How can you trust your own perceptions when you've barely learned to read the landscape?" Michael tried to grab his radio again, but his hand wouldn't obey him properly. He looked down and saw his arm was translucent like morning mist. "What are you doing to me?" "I'm not doing anything," the thing said. Its form shifting again. Now it looked like an elderly park ranger, the kind of weathered veteran who'd spent 40 years in these mountains. "You're doing it to yourself. The doubt, the uncertainty. In a place like this where the boundaries are thin, doubt can be a dangerous thing." "I'm real," Michael said. But even as he spoke the words, he felt them losing their weight. "I know I'm real. Do you? You're a rookie who's never handled a real emergency. You're thousands of miles from home wearing a uniform that still feels like a costume. You've been questioning your competence for months. How hard would it be to question your very existence?" The creature was right, and that realization hit Michael like a physical blow. He had been questioning everything about himself since arriving in Montana. Every decision, every protocol, every interaction with his colleagues. He felt like an imposter playing at being a forest ranger. And now apparently he was becoming one. "Fight it," he whispered to himself. "Fight it." But the doubt was spreading through him like ice water in his veins. If he wasn't competent enough to be a real ranger, how could he be sure he was real at all? "I have memories," he said desperately. "Childhood, school, Sarah. I have a life." "So do I," the creature said, now wearing the face of a young man who looked like he could have gone to college with Michael. "I remember growing up in Phoenix. I remember the exact taste of my grandmother's tamales. I remember the first time I kissed Sarah, behind the chemistry building on a Tuesday afternoon in March." Michael's knees gave out. He sank to the forest floor, feeling the leaves crunch beneath him, or at least he thought he felt them. It was getting harder to tell. "The beautiful thing about a perfect copy," the creature continued, "is that from the copy's perspective, it's the original. Your memories feel real because they are real. They're as real as anything in this forest." "But I'm not you," Michael said weakly. "Aren't you? Look at yourself, Michael. Really look." Michael looked down at his hands. They were barely visible now, like smoke given vague form. But he could still feel them, still move them. The sensation of existing without substance was nauseating. "This is what happens to people who get lost in these mountains," the creature said, its voice gentle now, almost pitying. "They become stories, legends, shadows of themselves that wander the trails forever, never quite real enough to leave, never quite gone enough to rest." "What about Megan?" Michael asked, looking at the woman who was still standing frozen, watching the conversation with growing terror. "What about her? She's just another lost hiker. They'll find her body in a few days, maybe a week. Exposure, probably. Tragic accident. These mountains are dangerous for people who don't know them. You're going to kill her." "I'm not going to do anything. She'll get lost, wander in circles until she collapses. It happens all the time. Ask any ranger who's worked these mountains for more than a few years. They all have stories." The creature paused, tilting its head as if listening to something only it could hear. "Speaking of which, I should probably get back to the visitor center. Dave Morrison is supposed to be working the information desk today, and we can't have him missing, can we? That would raise questions. The real Dave is probably having a very confusing day, waking up in places he doesn't remember going, finding his truck parked somewhere he doesn't remember driving. These things happen to people who work alone in isolated areas. Stress, fatigue. Eventually, they'll suggest he take some time off, maybe early retirement, and then I'll be Dave Morrison full-time. The creature's form solidified as it spoke, becoming a perfect replica of Michael's supervisor. It adjusted the Stetson hat and checked the radio on its belt, a radio that, unlike Michael's, was working perfectly. "This has been educational," it said in Dave's voice. "But I have work to do. A rookie ranger named Michael Chen is about to be reported missing. Very sad. They'll probably find him in a few weeks, if they find him at all." Another cautionary tale about the dangers of working alone in the wilderness. It turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Michael? When you're wandering these trails for the next few decades, try not to think too hard about whether you're real or not. It'll only make the time pass slower." The thing that looked like Dave Morrison walked away down the trail whistling tunelessly. Within moments it was gone, swallowed by the forest. Michael tried to follow, but his legs wouldn't obey him properly. He was becoming more transparent by the minute, and his movements felt sluggish, like trying to run underwater. "Help!" he called out, but his voice was barely a whisper now. Megan turned toward the sound, looking around with confusion. "Hello? Is someone there?" She couldn't see him anymore. Michael watched helplessly as she began walking down the trail, following the path the creature had taken. She would get lost within the hour. The thing had been right about that. These mountains were maze-like, full of game trails that looked like real paths, sudden drop-offs hidden by vegetation, weather that could turn deadly without warning. But as he watched her walk away, something crystallized in Michael's mind. The creature had been wrong about one thing. Michael wasn't doubting himself because he was incompetent. He was doubting himself because he cared. Because every decision he made out here could mean the difference between someone going home safely or not going home at all. That weight of responsibility was what made him careful, what made him think twice about everything. A competent person should doubt themselves in a job like this. Overconfidence killed people in the wilderness, and if he was real enough to doubt, he was real enough to act. Michael forced himself to his feet. He couldn't feel the ground beneath his boots anymore, but he could still move. Translucent or not, fading or not, he was still wearing the badge. "Megan," he called out, putting everything he had into his voice. She stopped, looking around. "Who's there?" "My name is Michael Chen. I'm a park ranger. You're in danger." "I can't see you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know, but you can hear me, right? That's enough." Michael began following her down the trail, his ghostly feet making no sound on the packed earth. Speaking took enormous effort now, as if each word was being drawn from some deep well inside him, but he forced himself to continue. "The person you were talking to before, the one who looked like a park ranger, he wasn't real. He's something that lives in these mountains, something that takes people's faces and voices." "That's impossible," Megan said, but she'd stopped walking. "I know how it sounds, but you saw him change, didn't you? You saw him become me, then become someone else." Megan nodded slowly, tears starting to flow again. "He's going to try to lead you deeper into the forest, make you think you're taking a shortcut. You can't trust anyone you meet out here, no matter how official they look." "But how do I know you're not him too?" It was a fair question, and Michael realized he had no good answer. "You don't," he admitted. "But I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm asking you to go back the way you came, back to the trailhead. Can you do that?" Megan looked back down the trail, toward where the creature had disappeared. Then she looked in the opposite direction, toward the trailhead. "I think so. But what about you? If you're really a ranger, shouldn't you come with me?" Michael laughed, and the sound was hollow and distant. "I don't think I can. I'm not sure I'm real enough anymore." "What do you mean?" How could he explain? That doubt could become a living thing in a place like this? That identity was apparently negotiable among things that wore faces like masks? "Just go," he said instead. "Go fast. And if you see anyone else on the trail, anyone at all, don't trust them, don't talk to them, just run." Megan hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded. She turned back toward the trailhead and began walking quickly, almost jogging. Michael tried to follow her, but with each step, he felt himself becoming less substantial. The forest around him was growing dim, as if someone was slowly turning down the brightness on the world. But Megan was moving in the right direction. She would make it back to the parking area, back to safety. She would tell her story, and maybe someone would believe her. Maybe someone wouldn't, but she would be alive to tell it. That had to be enough. Michael sank down beside the trail, his back against a large pine tree. He could barely feel the bark against his shoulders now, but he could still see Megan's figure in the distance, growing smaller but maintaining her steady pace toward safety. The radio on his belt crackled to life one final time. "All units be advised, we have a missing park ranger." Michael Chen failed to report in for his afternoon check. Last known location was the Avalanche Lake Trail. All available personnel respond for search and rescue operation. Michael tried to key his mic, but his fingers passed right through it. The search teams would find Megan first. She'd tell them about the ranger who helped her, and they'd search even harder for Michael. They'd search for days, maybe weeks. His family would come out from Phoenix. Sarah would cry at the press conferences. Eventually, they'd conclude he'd fallen into a ravine or been taken by a bear. These things happened in the wilderness, even to rangers who should have known better. But sometimes, late at night when the wind was blowing through the pines just right, other hikers might hear a voice calling out warnings, telling them to go back, to not trust the friendly faces they met on the trails, to stick to the marked paths no matter who tried to convince them otherwise. And maybe sometimes they'd listen. The last thing Michael saw before the forest claimed him completely was Megan's figure disappearing around a bend in the trail, moving steadily toward the trailhead and safety. It was enough. 3 days later, the search for Michael Chen was called off after 72 hours of intensive searching. His body was never found, though searchers did locate a traumatized hiker named Megan Patterson, who claimed to have been helped by a ranger who then mysteriously disappeared. Her description of the events was deemed unreliable due to shock and exposure, though she maintained her story's consistency through multiple interviews. Dave Morrison, who had been experiencing some health issues lately, blackouts, memory gaps, finding himself in places he didn't remember going, was quietly encouraged to take early retirement. His replacement was a transfer from Yellowstone, a ranger with impeccable credentials and glowing references, someone who knew these mountains better than anyone, who could guide visitors safely through even the most treacherous terrain. Someone who had Dave Morrison's face, Dave Morrison's voice, and Dave Morrison's memories, but who sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, smiled just a little too widely, showing just a few too many teeth. Caramba, that was intense. Did this ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying forest ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Michael. I read every single one. Sequoia, National Forest, California, October 2018. Andy Martinez adjusted his radio for the third time that morning, the static crackling through the quiet ranger station like broken glass. His colleagues had already headed out on their regular patrols, leaving him alone with a cardboard box that hadn't been opened in 3 years. The faded label read, Nicole Chen, missing person case, or 2015-087, closed. But Andy knew it shouldn't be closed. He pulled out his iPhone, the screen showing 6:47 a.m. and 2 missed calls from his wife Sarah. "Don't forget Emma's soccer game at 3, her text read. He smiled, picturing his 8-year-old daughter in her oversized cleats, then focused back on the box. Inside, crime scene photos showed the Devil's Backbone trail exactly as he'd found it yesterday, except these were taken 3 years ago. "Jesus," he whispered, comparing the photos to the ones on his phone. The same broken branch, the same scattered leaves, the same boot print pressed into the exact same patch of mud. Nicole Chen had been 26, a Stanford graduate student researching old-growth ecosystems. Her parents still called the station every month, their voices cracking with the weight of unanswered questions. Andy had read their statements so many times he could recite them. She was experienced. She knew these trails. Nicole would never just disappear. The radio crackled. "Martinez, you copy?" It was Sergeant Williams, his voice carrying the usual note of barely concealed irritation. "Copy, Sarge." What's your 20? Johnson said you were digging through old files again. Andy's jaw tightened. Johnson, the same guy who'd called his theory about trail patterns college boy bullshit last month. I'm at the station reviewing the Chen case. A pause. Static. Then, son, that case is colder than a witch's tit. Girl probably fell in a ravine somewhere. Focus on current priorities. But Sarge, I found Martinez. The voice was sharp now. Leave dead cases dead. That's an order. Andy stared at the photos spread across his desk. In 3 years, that boot print should have been washed away by dozens of storms. The broken branch should have rotted or been cleared by maintenance crews. Yet there it was, preserved like some sick museum exhibit. He grabbed his gear, Garmin GPS, first aid kit, emergency radio, water bottles, energy bars. His hands shook slightly as he zipped up his jacket. The smell of coffee from the break room mingled with the antiseptic scent of the station, creating an oddly comforting aroma that made him think of home. The drive to Devil's Backbone Trail took 23 minutes on winding mountain roads. Andy's 2016 Ford Ranger handled the curves easily, but his mind kept drifting to the photos. How do you explain identical crime scenes separated by 3 years? Equipment malfunction? Camera glitch? Or something else entirely? The trailhead parking lot was empty, except for a rusted Subaru Outback with Oregon plates. Andy checked his watch. 8:15 a.m. He radioed his position to dispatch, then stepped onto the trail that had haunted his thoughts for months. The Devil's Backbone was aptly named. A narrow ridge trail that snaked along cliff tops for 2 miles before descending into thick forest. Local Yokuts legends spoke of it as a hungry path that devoured the unwary. Andy had always dismissed such stories as tourist nonsense, but now, his boots crunched on fallen leaves that seemed too dry for October. The morning air carried the scent of pine and something else, something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water. He'd grown up in these mountains, knew every smell and sound, but this was wrong somehow. The GPS showed he was making good time, but his watch disagreed. According to the Garmin, he'd been walking for 12 minutes. His watch said 27. Andy stopped, comparing the devices. Both were supposed to sync with satellite time. Both showed different results. He tapped his watch face, then shook his head. Equipment problems. That's all. The trail curved left around a massive sequoia, and there it was, the crime scene from the photos. The broken branch hung at the exact same angle. The boot print sat in the mud like a fresh impression, despite the fact that no rain had fallen in 2 weeks. Andy's heart rate spiked. He could feel it hammering against his ribs as he knelt beside the print. Size 7.5, consistent with Nicole's shoe size. The tread pattern matched her hiking boots perfectly. He photographed everything, then pulled out the old crime scene photos for comparison. Identical, down to the smallest detail. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice seeming to echo strangely in the still air. A bird called from somewhere ahead, a sound he didn't recognize. In 23 years of Forest Service, Andy had cataloged every bird species in Sequoia. This was something new, something that made his skin crawl. He followed the trail deeper into the forest where ancient trees blocked most of the sunlight. His radio crackled with static, then went silent. No bars on his phone. Standard for this elevation, but the isolation felt heavier today. The sweet floral scent grew stronger. Andy's stomach churned. It reminded him of his grandmother's funeral, of flowers wilting in an overheated chapel. He pulled out his water bottle, but the liquid tasted metallic, wrong. Another bird call. Closer now. Andy reached for his emergency whistle, then froze. 30 feet ahead, the trail forked. According to his GPS, there should be no fork here. The Devil's Backbone was a straight shot for another half mile. He consulted his topographical map. One trail, no fork. Yet there it was, a second path branching left into deeper shadow. Fresh boot prints led down both directions. Andy's training kicked in. Document everything. He photographed the unexpected fork, noting GPS coordinates that made no sense according to his maps. The air temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees. and his breath now misted faintly. The prints on the left path were clear, size 7.5 hiking boots heading downhill at a hurried pace. Nicole's path. 3 years ago and somehow still fresh. The prints on the main trail were different, larger, heavier, leading in the same direction Andy had been walking. Someone else was out here. Andy's radio crackled suddenly. "Martinez, you copy?" He fumbled with the device. "This is Martinez, say again." Static. Then silence. His iPhone showed no signal, but the screen flickered strangely, displaying the time as 11:47 a.m. That couldn't be right. He'd left the parking lot at 8:30. Andy checked his watch. 9:15 a.m. The GPS showed yet another time. 2:23 p.m. "What the hell?" he whispered. A sound behind him made him spin around. Heavy footsteps on loose gravel. But the trail behind him was empty. Andy's mouth went dry. His heart rate spiked again, and he could taste copper on his tongue. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to radio for backup, to get the hell off this mountain. Instead, he thought of Nicole's parents, of their monthly phone calls, of promises made to find answers. He thought of his daughter Emma, who looked up to him like he was some kind of hero. What would she think if he ran away from the first real lead in 3 years? Andy chose the left path. The trail descended steeply through dense undergrowth that shouldn't exist here. According to the Park Service maps, this area had been cleared for fire prevention in 2016. Yet massive ferns brushed against his legs, and thorny vines caught at his jacket. The sweet smell intensified, cloying, nauseating. Nicole's boot prints remained clear in the soft earth, as if she'd passed through minutes ago. Andy followed them around a bend and stopped cold. There, hanging from a low branch, was a piece of fabric. Red fleece. The same color as the jacket Nicole had been wearing when she disappeared. Andy photographed it from multiple angles before carefully bagging the evidence. The fabric was clean, unfaded. 3 years of weather should have destroyed it completely. His radio crackled again. "One following trail, dangerous. Hello? This is Ranger Martinez. Please respond." Nothing. The trail ahead split again, and again. Each fork led deeper into forest that shouldn't exist, following paths that weren't on any map. Nicole's prints took a seemingly random route, sometimes doubling back, sometimes veering sharply left or right. Andy began to understand. She'd been lost, turned around, following a trail that kept changing, kept offering new paths that led nowhere, or everywhere. His watch now showed 6:43 p.m. The GPS insisted it was 9:12 a.m. His phone displayed a date 3 days in the future. The shadows were lengthening, though the sun's position in the sky suggested early afternoon. Andy's throat felt raw, and he realized he'd been walking for hours without stopping for water. He checked his supplies. 3 energy bars were missing. He'd only eaten 1. A new sound reached him. Running water. The creek marked on his maps was 2 miles south of here, but water was water. Andy pushed through a stand of young sequoias and emerged beside a crystal-clear stream. Nicole's boot prints led directly to the water's edge, then vanished. Andy knelt and cupped the clear water to his lips. It tasted perfect. Cold, clean, refreshing. He filled his bottles, then noticed something that made his blood freeze. Reflected in the water's surface, standing directly behind him, was a figure in a red fleece jacket. Andy spun around. Empty forest. He looked back at the water. Just his own reflection, pale and wide-eyed. "Nicole?" he called out, his voice cracking. "Nicole Chen? If you're out here, I'm here to help." The forest absorbed his words without echo. Then from somewhere ahead came a response. "Help. Me." The voice was female, weak, desperate. Andy crashed through the underbrush toward the sound, his heart pounding. "Where are you? Keep talking." "Help. Me. Please." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Andy spun in circles, trying to pinpoint the source. His radio crackled with garbled transmissions, and his phone screen flickered between random times and dates. "I'm coming. Stay where you are." But as he stumbled forward, the forest around him began to change. Trees shifted position when he wasn't looking directly at them. Paths appeared and disappeared. The ground beneath his feet felt solid one moment, uncertain the next. Andy realized with growing horror that he was lost. Completely, utterly lost in a forest he'd known since childhood, following trails that shouldn't exist, chasing a voice that might not be human. His GPS showed coordinates that placed him in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. As darkness fell with unnatural speed, Andy understood the truth about Devil's Backbone Trail. It wasn't just a path through the forest. It was alive, hungry, and it had been feeding for far longer than 3 years. Somewhere in the distance, Nicole's voice continued calling for help. But Andy was beginning to wonder if helping her was possible, or if he'd simply become the next person to disappear into the hungry darkness of a trail that existed outside of time and reason. His last coherent thought before the forest swallowed him completely was of Emma, waiting for him to come home from her soccer game. But according to his phone, that game had happened 3 days ago. The radio crackled to life at 6:47 a.m., jolting Forest Ranger Michael Torres from his coffee and morning routine reports. 23 years patrolling these mountains, and he still felt that familiar surge of adrenaline when dispatch called. Unit 47, we've got a missing hiker reported in Sector 12. Female, early 20s, name's Samantha Chen. Last seen yesterday evening near Devil's Backbone Trail. Family's frantic. Michael grabbed his gear with practiced efficiency, the weight of his pack familiar against his shoulders. His weathered hands checked his equipment automatically. GPS, emergency beacon, first aid kit, survival gear. The morning air bit at his face as he stepped outside, pine needles crunching under his boots with a sound that had become the soundtrack of his life. Copy dispatch. On my way. Weather looking good for a search. But as he drove the winding mountain road toward the trailhead, something felt off. The usual dawn chorus of birds was absent, leaving an unnatural silence that made his skin crawl. Michael shook his head, annoyed at himself. 23 years, and he'd never lost anyone on his watch. He wasn't about to start now. The parking area at Devil's Backbone was empty, except for a red Honda Civic with California plates, Samantha's car. Michael ran his flashlight over the interior through the windows. Hiking boots were missing from the back seat along with a day pack. Smart girl, at least she'd come prepared. But why hadn't she returned? The trail started innocuously enough, a well-maintained path that thousands of hikers used every year. Michael's trained eyes scanned for sign, disturbed vegetation, footprints, anything that might indicate Samantha's passage. About a mile in, he found what he was looking for. A clear boot print in soft earth beside a stream crossing, size 7 women's hiking boot with a distinctive waffle pattern. Following trail north from Devil's Backbone, he radioed back to dispatch. Got clear sign approximately 18 hours old. The forest grew denser as he climbed, old-growth pines blocking out more and more sunlight until he was walking through a green-tinted twilight. His radio began picking up static interference, something that happened in these mountains but never failed to irritate him. Michael prided himself on staying connected, staying in control. The static felt like losing grip on something essential. By noon, he'd followed Samantha's trail 3 miles into increasingly remote terrain. The boot prints were still clear, but something bothered him about their spacing and direction. They seemed to follow the main trail for a while, then suddenly veer off into trackless forest. Not the behavior of an experienced hiker, which Samantha's gear suggested she was. Michael paused at the spot where the prints left the trail, studying the ground carefully. No signs of a struggle, no indication she'd been forced off the path. She'd just turned and walked into the woods. His gut, honed by decades of mountain experience, told him this was wrong. Hikers didn't do this, not smart ones, not ones who came prepared. The air temperature dropped noticeably as he followed her tracks into the unmarked forest. His breath began to mist, despite the fact that it was supposed to be a warm October day. Michael checked his watch, 12:47 p.m. His wife, Sarah, would be making lunch about now, probably wondering when he'd be home. He'd promised his daughter Jessica he'd help with her science project tonight. These thoughts felt suddenly precious, like memories of a life he might not return to. "What the hell?" he muttered, shaking off the morbid thoughts. He was Michael Torres, the guy who'd rescued dozens of lost hikers who knew these mountains better than his own backyard. One missing girl wasn't going to break his perfect record, but Samantha's tracks led deeper into terrain he didn't recognize, despite his decades of experience in these woods. The trees seemed older here, their trunks scarred with strange symbols that looked too deliberate to be natural. Animal damage, he told himself, but the patterns made his teeth itch with unease. The radio static grew worse, punctuated by brief moments of clarity that carried voices he couldn't quite make out. Not dispatch, something else, something that sounded almost like chanting. Michael adjusted his radio settings, but the interference only intensified. The isolation pressed against him like a physical weight, reminding him that he was miles from backup, miles from anyone who could help if things went bad. His water bottle was already half empty, despite the cool air. The physical demands of tracking over rough terrain were taking their toll, but more concerning was the growing sense that he wasn't alone in these woods. Every few minutes, he caught peripheral movement that vanished when he turned to look. Squirrels, he told himself. Birds, nothing unusual. But squirrels didn't explain the feeling of being watched, the crawling sensation between his shoulder blades that made him want to constantly look over his shoulder. Michael had spent enough time alone in the wilderness to know the difference between paranoia and intuition. This felt like something was stalking him. If this story is giving you chills, hit the follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Michael's situation? Comment below. The tracks led to a clearing he'd never seen before, despite thinking he knew every square mile of this forest. In the center stood the remains of an old stone structure, not a cabin or ranger station, but something that looked almost ceremonial. The stones were arranged in a rough circle, with gaps that might have once held wooden posts. More of those strange symbols were carved into the largest stones, deep grooves that looked fresh despite the apparent age of the structure. Samantha's boot prints circled the stone ring 3 times before leading to its center, where they simply stopped. No signs of a struggle, no indication she'd left the circle. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air from that exact spot. Michael keyed his radio, but got only static. His GPS showed his location as unknown, despite the fact that it had been working fine all morning. The screen flickered between coordinates that made no sense, and a simple message. No signal available. The temperature continued to drop, and the silence that had bothered him all morning deepened into something oppressive. No bird calls, no insect noise, no wind through the trees. Just his own breathing and heartbeat, loud in the unnatural quiet. He examined the stone circle more carefully, his trained eye looking for any clue about Samantha's disappearance. The carved symbols hurt to look at directly, not because they were indistinct, but because they seemed to shift and writhe when he focused on them. Michael blinked hard, attributing the effect to eye strain and altitude. Behind one of the larger stones, he found something that made his blood run cold. A small pile of personal effects that clearly weren't Samantha's. Driver's licenses, jewelry, photographs, all from different people, all showing signs of having been exposed to weather for varying lengths of time. Some looked recent, others were yellowed and cracked with age. The oldest license he could find was dated 1987. 31 years of people disappearing in this spot that officially didn't exist on any map or ranger report. Michael's hands shook slightly as he photographed the evidence with his phone, though the images came out strangely distorted, as if something was interfering with the camera's ability to record what he was seeing. The faces in the photographs all shared a similar expression. Not fear, but a kind of vacant bliss that made his skin crawl. A sound broke the oppressive silence. Voices, distant but unmistakably human, speaking in a rhythmic cadence that sounded like chanting. Michael's military training kicked in, and he crouched behind the largest stone listening intently. The voices were coming from deeper in the forest, from a direction that led even further from any marked trail. As the chanting grew closer, Michael caught fragments of words that sounded like English but weren't quite right. Ancient English, maybe, or some dialect he didn't recognize. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost compelling. He found himself taking an unconscious step toward the sound before snapping back to awareness. His radio suddenly crackled to life with perfect clarity. "Unit 47, report your location. We've lost your signal." But when Michael tried to respond, his radio went dead again. The brief contact felt like a lifeline that had been yanked away, leaving him more isolated than before. The chanting stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it seemed to ring in his ears. Michael waited, barely breathing for any indication of movement. Instead, he heard something worse. Samantha's voice, calling for help from somewhere beyond the trees. "Help me! Please, someone help me! I'm hurt!" The voice was weak, desperate, exactly what he'd expect from someone who'd been lost in the woods overnight. Every instinct told him to respond, to follow the voice and rescue her. But 31 years of collected driver's licenses suggested this might not be as simple as it seemed. Michael made a decision that went against every principle of his career. He didn't immediately respond to the cry for help. Instead, he pulled out his binoculars and scanned the forest in the direction of Samantha's voice. What he saw through the lenses made him question his sanity. Figures in dark robes moved between the trees with an unnatural grace, their faces hidden by deep hoods. They carried torches despite the daylight, flames that burned with colors that had no name. At their center walked a figure that might have been Samantha, the right height and build, wearing hiking clothes. But something about her movement was wrong. Too fluid, too purposeful for someone who was supposedly lost and injured. The chanting resumed, and this time Michael could make out more of the words. They weren't in any language he recognized, but they seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his bones. The sound made him nauseous, made his vision blur at the edges. He had to grip the stone to keep from falling. His phone buzzed with a text message, somehow managing to get through whatever was interfering with his other communications. The message was from Sarah. "Jess is worried. You promised to help with homework. Love you." The normalcy of the message, the reminder of his real life, his family, his responsibilities, cut through the hypnotic effect of the chanting like a slap. Michael shook his head clear and realized he'd been standing upright, no longer hidden behind the stone. The robed figures had stopped chanting and were looking directly at him, though he couldn't see their faces. Samantha's voice called out again, but this time it was different. Michael Torres, I know you're there. I've been waiting for you." No lost hiker should know his name. No lost hiker should sound like they'd been expecting him specifically. Michael's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. Not standard ranger equipment, but something he'd carried since his army days, and had never been more grateful to have. The robed figures began moving toward him in perfect synchronization, their torches leaving trails of impossible color in the air. Michael backed away from the stone circle, keeping them in sight while looking for escape routes. The forest that had seemed merely dense before now felt actively hostile, branches catching at his clothes and roots trying to trip him with every step. His rational mind cataloged the tactical situation. Unknown number of hostiles, unfamiliar terrain, no backup, limited ammunition, compromised communications. Every principle of survival told him to retreat, to get back to his vehicle and call for massive backup. But 31 driver's licenses told him that people had been disappearing here for decades, and nobody had ever found this place before. If he left now, Samantha would become number 32, and the pattern would continue until someone else stumbled onto this nightmare, someone who might not be as well trained or well armed as he was. Michael Torres had never run from a fight in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. Even if the enemy was something that defied every assumption he'd made about the world. The chanting resumed, louder now, with harmonics that seemed to come from the earth itself. The robed figures continued their advance, no longer bothering to hide among the trees. In the growing twilight, had it really gotten dark this fast? Their torches cast writhing shadows that moved independently of their bearers. Michael keyed his radio one more time, hoping against hope for contact. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've located the missing hiker, but I need immediate backup. We have a situation here that's beyond normal parameters. Repeat, I need backup now. Static answered him, but this time he thought he heard something else buried in the interference. Sarah's voice, calling his name. Then Jessica's voice crying for her daddy. Impossible, but unmistakably real. The figures were close enough now that he could see what lay beneath their hoods. Not faces, but shifting darkness that hurt to look at directly. They moved without making any sound, their feet not quite touching the ground. The scent that reached him was of old earth and decay, of things that had been buried too long and then disturbed. Behind them walked the figure that looked like Samantha, and now Michael could see her face clearly. It was definitely her. The same features from her driver's license photo, the same facial structure, but her eyes held no recognition, no fear, no human emotion at all. She moved like a sleepwalker, or like someone being controlled by invisible strings. "Join us, Michael," she said in a voice that was hers but wrong. "We've been waiting so long for someone like you, someone strong, someone who could complete the circle." The stone ring behind him began to glow with the same impossible colors as the torches. Michael risked a glance back and saw that the carved symbols were moving, rearranging themselves into new patterns that made his eyes water and his brain itch. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in as many seconds, and his breath now came out in thick clouds. This was it. This was the moment where his old life ended and something new began. Michael Torres, the man who'd never lost a hiker, who'd built his identity on being unshakable, who thought he'd seen everything these mountains could throw at him, was about to discover how wrong he'd been about everything. But as the circle of robed figures closed around him, as Samantha's empty eyes locked onto his, as reality itself seemed to warp and bend in ways that violated every natural law he'd ever trusted, Michael thought of Sarah making lunch and Jessica waiting for help with her homework. He thought of 23 years of successful rescues, of a perfect record he'd built one saved life at a time. The chanting reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the earth itself. The stone circle flared with light that had no earthly source, and Michael Torres, who'd never backed down from anything in his life, raised his weapon and prepared to fight something that shouldn't exist for a girl who might already be lost, and a life he was determined to return to. Whatever happened next, it would redefine his understanding of what was possible in this world. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible certainty was growing. He might save Samantha. He might even survive this encounter. But he would never be the same man who'd answered that radio call this morning. The forest held its breath, waiting to see what a lifetime of courage could accomplish against forces that existed outside the boundaries of human understanding. The end. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying forest ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Samantha. I read every single one. Olympic National Forest, Washington, October 13th, 2018, 3:47 p.m. The static from Ranger David Sullivan's radio cut through the October air like a rusty blade. 3 years since the Cascade incident, and his hands still trembled when dispatch called during search operations. The weight of his Glock 40 felt heavier than usual against his hip, and the familiar ache in his chest, the one that never quite went away, pulsed with each heartbeat. Base to Sullivan. Over. David's fingers fumbled with the radio clip, muscle memory fighting against the involuntary shake that still plagued him during high-stress calls. The smell of wet pine needles and decomposing leaves filled his nostrils, autumn scents that should have been comforting but instead triggered flashes of memory he'd rather forget. Sullivan here, over. We've got a missing hiker on the Quinault Ridge Trail. 23-year-old female Jessica Chen, last seen by camping party around 2:30 p.m. Family's getting panicked. You're closest to the area. David's throat constricted. 23. Same age as Melissa had been. He closed his eyes, feeling the October wind cut through his Forest Service jacket, and forced himself to breathe slowly through his nose. This is different. This is just a lost hiker. Copy that. ETA 15 minutes. Any additional details on last known position? Witness says she was heading toward the old logging road near Miller Creek. Said she wanted to check out some weird symbols carved into trees. Probably just old survey markers, but... The radio went quiet for a moment, leaving David with only the sound of his own increasingly rapid heartbeat and the whisper of wind through Douglas firs that stretched toward an overcast sky. But what dispatch? Well, this is the third missing person report in that area this month. Other two turned up fine after getting turned around, but just keep your eyes open, Sullivan. If this story is giving you chills, hit that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in David's situation? Comment below. David's boots crunched against the frost-covered trail as he made his way toward Miller Creek, each step stirring up the earthy scent of wet soil and rotting leaves. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air, and he could feel the familiar weight of his emergency pack pulling at his shoulders. First aid kit, emergency beacon, MREs, water purification tablets. Standard equipment that had saved lives before, though sometimes David wondered if any amount of preparation could protect against the kinds of things that lurked in the deep woods. His iPhone 8 showed 2 bars of signal, which would disappear completely once he got deeper into the forest. The GPS app displayed his location as a blue dot moving through a sea of green, but David had learned not to trust technology completely. 3 years ago, his GPS had shown him walking in circles for hours, while Melissa's screams echoed through trees that shouldn't have been there. Stop. Focus on the present. The old logging road appeared through the trees like a scar cut into the landscape, overgrown with blackberry vines and salmonberry bushes that grabbed at his uniform pants. David paused at the intersection, pulling out his binoculars to scan the area. The Zeiss glasses, a birthday gift from his wife Sarah, brought the distant tree line into sharp focus. Jessica. His voice echoed off the surrounding ridges, swallowed quickly by the dense canopy. Jessica Chen, Forest Service. Nothing. David checked his watch, 4:23 p.m. In October, darkness came fast in the Pacific Northwest, and the weather report had mentioned possible snow at elevation. He keyed his radio. Base, this is Sullivan. I'm at the Miller Creek Logging Road junction. No sign of the missing hiker yet. Beginning systematic search pattern. Copy, Sullivan. Be advised, family just arrived at the ranger station. They're pretty shook up. Said Jessica's been acting strange lately, talking about finding the truth about something in the forest. A chill that had nothing to do with the October air ran down David's spine. Finding the truth. That's exactly what Melissa had said before she disappeared for 18 hours and came back. Changed. David's right hand unconsciously moved to touch the small silver cross hanging beneath his uniform shirt. A gift from Father Martinez after the incident. The priest had insisted it was blessed, though David remained skeptical about the effectiveness of religious artifacts against the kinds of things he'd encountered. Any specifics about what kind of truth she was looking for? Negative. Family just said she'd been researching local history. Something about missing persons cases from the 1970s. They found printouts in her room about unsolved disappearances. David's blood ran cold. The Cascade incident had involved research into historical disappearances too. Melissa had been working on her anthropology thesis about Pacific Northwest folklore when she stumbled onto something that should have stayed buried. Following the overgrown logging road deeper into the forest, David noticed the trees changing. The familiar Douglas firs and western hemlocks gave way to older growth, massive cedars whose trunks disappeared into the misty canopy above. The air grew thicker, more oppressive, carrying scents of mold and something else, something organic and wrong that made his stomach churn. His radio crackled with static, the signal degrading as he moved further from civilization. The GPS on his phone showed his location as questionable, the blue dot jumping erratically across the screen. Jessica, can you hear me? David paused near a cluster of ancient cedars, their bark scarred with what looked like deliberate marks. Not the random scratches of wildlife or the systematic cuts of survey markers, but symbols carved deep into the living wood, spirals and intersecting lines that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in too many dimensions for human eyes to properly process. His breathing quickened. Melissa had described symbols just like these. The sound of breaking branches made him spin around, hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Through the trees, perhaps 50 yards away, he caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of red fabric that could be a hiker's jacket. Jessica! David plunged through the underbrush, branches whipping at his face and catching on his equipment belt. The red fabric stayed just ahead of him, always visible, but never close enough to identify clearly. His boots slipped on wet leaves and mossy logs as he pursued the figure through terrain that seemed to shift and change with each step. This is wrong. The topography shouldn't be changing like this. His radio burst with static and garbled voices that sounded almost like chanting, forcing him to turn down the volume. The GPS on his phone had given up entirely, showing only a blank screen with the message, "Location not available." Suddenly, David broke through a wall of vegetation into a small clearing he'd never seen before, despite having patrolled this area for over 8 years. In the center of the clearing stood a young Asian woman in a red hiking jacket, her back turned to him. Her black hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she stood perfectly still among the fallen leaves. "Jessica?" David approached slowly, one hand raised in a peaceful gesture, the other resting on his radio. "Jessica Chen? I'm Ranger Sullivan with the Forest Service. Your family is worried about you." The woman didn't respond. She stood motionless, facing a large cedar tree whose trunk was covered in the same disturbing symbols David had noticed earlier. Up close, the carvings seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, like a heartbeat carved into wood. "Jessica, I need you to turn around slowly and talk to me. Are you injured?" David was close enough now to smell her shampoo, something floral and clean that contrasted sharply with the musty odors of the forest. Close enough to see that her shoulders were rising and falling with steady breathing. Close enough to realize that something was terribly wrong. "Jessica?" When she finally turned around, David's world shattered. The woman had Jessica's body, Jessica's red jacket, Jessica's long black hair, but her face was a blank expanse of skin, smooth and featureless as polished marble. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just an empty canvas where a human face should have been. David's hand flew to his weapon as his mind reeled, trying to process what he was seeing. The training kicked in. Assess the threat, radio for backup, maintain safe distance. But the training manual had never covered anything like this. "This isn't real," he whispered, backing away from the impossible figure. "This isn't fucking real." The faceless Jessica tilted her head at an angle that suggested she was listening, though she had no ears to hear with. Around the clearing, David became aware of other figures emerging from between the trees. Men and women in outdoor clothing, all facing him with the same terrible absence where their faces should have been. David's radio crackled to life with a voice that sounded like his own. "Base, this is Sullivan. I've located Jessica Chen. Everything is fine. Returning to station." "Copy, Sullivan. Glad to hear it." But David's finger wasn't on the transmit button. His radio was clipped to his belt, untouched. This is the trauma. This is PTSD. Just like Dr. Petrov warned could happen. David squeezed his eyes shut, counting to 10 the way his therapist had taught him. When he opened them, the clearing was empty except for fallen leaves and the scarred cedar tree. No faceless figures, no Jessica, just the normal sounds of a Pacific Northwest forest in autumn. His radio crackled again. "Sullivan, what's your status? You've been off comms for 20 minutes. 20 minutes? David checked his watch. 4:23 p.m. The same time he'd checked it before entering the clearing. But the position of the shadows had changed, and his iPhone showed 5:17 p.m. "Base, I'm continuing the search. No sign of the missing hiker yet." "Sullivan, are you all right? You sound shook up." David looked around the empty clearing, trying to reconcile what he'd seen with what his rational mind insisted was possible. The symbols on the cedar tree were still there, carved deep into the bark, but they looked different now. Less geometric, more like natural scarring from old lightning strikes. "I'm fine, dispatch. Just, the terrain is more challenging than expected." But as David turned to leave the clearing, he noticed something that made his blood freeze. There, pressed into the soft earth near the base of the scarred cedar, was a clear boot print, too small to be his own, with a tread pattern that matched modern hiking boots. Jessica had been here, recently, and if the faceless figures had been a trauma-induced hallucination, then where was she now? David followed the boot prints deeper into the forest, his flashlight beam cutting through shadows that seemed to move independently of the wind. The trail led away from the logging road into old-growth forest where the canopy blocked out most of the remaining daylight. His phone battery had dropped to 30% despite being at nearly full charge an hour earlier. The GPS remained useless, showing his location somewhere in the middle of a lake that didn't exist. Every few minutes, his radio would emit bursts of static that almost sounded like voices, forcing him to constantly adjust the frequency. The boot prints led to a game trail that David didn't recognize, winding between massive tree trunks and through patches of devil's club that grew unnaturally dense. The air grew colder with each step, and his breath began forming visible clouds despite the relatively mild October temperature. Something is very wrong here. The game trail opened into another clearing, this one much larger than the first. David's flashlight beam revealed something that made him reach for his weapon, a circle of stones arranged around a central fire pit, with symbols painted on each rock in what looked like dried blood. Around the stone circle, the ground was trampled flat by many feet, and David could make out the remnants of camp chairs and sleeping bags hastily abandoned. This wasn't a random camp. This was a meeting place. David keyed his radio. "Base, this is Sullivan. I've discovered what appears to be an illegal camping area in the Miller Creek vicinity. Multiple occupants recently abandoned. Possible connection to missing hiker." Static answered him, followed by a voice that might have been dispatch. "Sullivan, stay. Location. Sending backup." The transmission cut off, leaving David alone with the sound of wind through the trees and his own rapid heartbeat. He photographed the stone circle with his phone, the camera flash revealing more details that made his skin crawl. Animal bones scattered around the fire pit, pieces of fabric that could be clothing, and carved into a large cedar at the edge of the clearing. More of those impossible symbols that seemed to squirm and shift when viewed directly. A branch snapped behind him. David spun around, flashlight and weapon both drawn, to see a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. Not faceless this time. A middle-aged man in camping gear, very much human, very much real. "You shouldn't be here, Ranger." The man's voice was calm, almost gentle, with a slight accent David couldn't place. "This is a sacred place." "Forest Service. I'm looking for a missing hiker, Jessica Chen. Have you seen her?" The man stepped into the clearing, and David could see others moving in the shadows behind him. A woman in her 60s wearing expensive hiking gear. A younger man with the lean build of a serious outdoorsman. More figures emerging from the tree line, all of them moving with the coordinated precision of people who knew each other well. "Jessica is safe," the older woman said, her voice carrying the authority of leadership. "She came to us willingly, seeking answers to questions that have haunted this forest for decades." David kept his weapon lowered but ready, playing for time while he assessed the situation. 8 people that he could see, probably more in the trees, all of them between him and the trail back to civilization. His radio remained silent despite repeated attempts to raise dispatch. "I need to see her, now. If she's safe, there's no reason she can't speak for herself." The woman smiled, and David noticed that her teeth were stained red. "Oh, she will speak, when the circle is complete and the old ways are honored. Your friend Melissa spoke beautifully before she joined us." David's world tilted. Melissa was dead. Had been dead for 3 years, officially ruled a suicide after her body was found at the bottom of Cascade Falls. Except David had never believed the official story because the body they found wasn't quite right. Close enough to pass forensic examination, but wrong in ways that only someone who had known her intimately would notice. Melissa died 3 years ago. "Death is just another boundary to cross," the man said, stepping closer, "like the boundary between your world and ours." Jessica understood this when she came seeking the truth about the disappearances, just as Melissa understood when she found our sacred grove. David's finger moved to the trigger guard of his Glock. "Where is Jessica? I want to see her now, or I'm calling for backup and shutting down this entire operation." The woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. "Call for backup, Ranger Sullivan. Your radio hasn't worked since you entered our territory. Your GPS shows you in places that don't exist. Your phone battery drains despite being connected to nothing." She was right. David's iPhone now showed 15% battery and no signal bars at all. His radio produced only static no matter which frequency he tried. "Technology is a crutch," the older man said. "Out here, in the deep woods where the old power still runs strong, only faith matters. Faith and sacrifice." Sacrifice? David's weapon was fully raised now, safety off, trained on the woman who seemed to be the group's leader. "What kind of sacrifice?" "The kind that opens doors," she replied. "The kind that lets the lost ones find their way home." Melissa understood. She gave herself willingly to become a bridge between worlds. From somewhere beyond the clearing, carried on wind that seemed to blow from all directions at once, David heard a voice calling his name, a woman's voice, familiar and impossible. "David, help me, I'm so cold." Melissa's voice. Melissa, who had been dead for 3 years. Melissa, whose body had been found broken on the rocks below Cascade Falls after David had spent 18 hours searching for her in terrain that kept changing around him. "She's waiting for you," the woman said softly. "In the sacred grove where the boundaries are thin. Jessica is there too, learning the truth about what lies beyond the veil. David, please, I can't find my way back." The voice was closer now, definitely Melissa's, carrying the same note of desperate fear he remembered from that night 3 years ago when she'd called him crying about the research she'd uncovered. Research into missing persons cases that went back to the 1800s, all centered around this same stretch of forest. David's trained, rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that dead people didn't call out from dark woods, that cult groups didn't have the power to manipulate electronics or create supernatural phenomena. But his traumatized heart recognized the voice with absolute certainty. "If I go with you," he said slowly, "will you let Jessica go? She's not part of whatever this is." "Everyone becomes part of it eventually," the woman replied. "The forest has been calling to you for 3 years, David. Every nightmare, every moment of guilt, every time you've stood at the edge of Cascade Falls and wondered if you should jump. That's been us, calling you home." She was right about the nightmares, right about the guilt, right about the nights when he'd driven to Cascade Falls and sat in his truck, staring at the place where Melissa's body had been found, wondering if joining her would end the constant ache in his chest. "David, I'm so scared. Please come find me." David holstered his weapon, not because he trusted these people, but because his rational mind was losing the battle against 3 years of unprocessed trauma and impossible hope. If there was even a chance that Melissa was somehow still alive, still reachable, he had to try. "Take me to her." Holy crap, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying forest ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Jessica and Melissa. I read every single one. The group led David deeper into the forest, following trails that seemed to appear and disappear based on some logic he couldn't understand. His captors, because that's what they were despite the lack of physical restraint, moved through the darkness with the confidence of people who had walked these paths many times before. The woman who seemed to be their leader stayed close to David, occasionally reaching out to guide him around obstacles he couldn't see. Her touch was ice cold through his uniform sleeve, and she smelled of grave earth and pine smoke. "You have questions," she said as they walked. "About Melissa. About what happened 3 years ago." "She's dead." David's voice came out rougher than he intended. "I saw her body." "You saw a body. Arranged by local authorities who needed to close a case that was making them uncomfortable. But Melissa chose a different path, just as Jessica is choosing now." The trail opened into a vast clearing dominated by a circle of ancient cedars, their trunks easily 20 feet in diameter. In the center of the circle stood a structure that made David's blood freeze. an altar built from stones that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly. And tied to the altar, very much alive but unconscious, was Jessica Chen. Jesus Christ. David reached for his weapon again but found his hand wouldn't move. Not paralyzed exactly, but reluctant to act, as if his arm was moving through thick honey. "She's unharmed," the woman assured him, "merely prepared for the crossing. When the moon reaches its zenith, she'll join the others who have gone before." Others like Melissa? Melissa was the first in many years to find us willingly. She understood that the boundaries between life and death, between this world and the next, are merely human constructs. Here, in the sacred grove, those boundaries have always been thin. From the darkness beyond the circle of trees came movement, figures emerging from shadows that seemed deeper than physics should allow. Men and women in modern clothing that looked somehow wrong, as if the fabric had been underwater for years. David counted at least a dozen of them, all moving with the same strange, coordinated grace. And among them, impossible but undeniable, was Melissa. She looked exactly as she had 3 years ago. Same blonde hair, same bright green eyes, same unconscious grace in her movements. But her skin had the pale, translucent quality of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in years. And when she smiled at David, her teeth were stained the same red as the cult leaders. "Hello, David. I've been waiting for you." David's legs nearly gave out. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was elaborate theater, drugs in the water, mass hypnosis, anything but the impossible reality of his dead girlfriend standing 10 feet away. But her voice was exactly right, carrying the same slight breathiness that had always appeared when she was nervous. "Melissa? How is this possible?" "Death isn't an ending here," she said, moving closer with that same fluid grace he remembered. "It's a transformation. The old powers that run through this forest don't recognize human concepts of mortality. You died. I identified your body. You identified a shell that I discarded when I chose to cross over. The real me, the essential me, lives on in service to something far greater than human existence." Melissa reached out to touch his face, and her skin was ice cold but undeniably real. Real enough to convince his traumatized mind that 3 years of grief and guilt had been unnecessary. Real enough to make him want to believe in impossible things. "The cult," he said weakly. "These people killed you. These people offered me transcendence, just as they're offering it to Jessica now. Just as they're offering it to you." David looked at Jessica, still unconscious on the dark stone altar. Her chest rose and fell with steady breathing, but her face was pale, and her lips had a blue tinge that suggested hypothermia or drug-induced stupor. "She's dying. She's transforming," the cult leader corrected. "The process requires a temporary separation from physical consciousness, while the spirit learns to navigate new territories. And if I refuse to let you continue this process?" Melissa's smile faded. "Then Jessica dies for real and you join the list of missing persons who are never found. The forest has many hungry places, David. Many deep holes where people disappear forever." From around the sacred grove came the sound of chanting, low voices singing in a language that predated human speech. The symbols carved into the ancient cedars began to glow with soft phosphorescence, and the air itself seemed to thicken with presence. David's rational mind made a final desperate attempt to assert reality. "This is a drug-induced hallucination. These people dosed you with something when you weren't looking. Melissa is dead and has been dead for 3 years. None of this is real." But Melissa's hand on his face felt real. The cold air cutting through his jacket felt real. Jessica's labored breathing from the altar felt terrifyingly real. "What do you want from me?" "Join us," Melissa said simply. "Complete the circle. Help Jessica make the crossing safely and then make it yourself. We can be together again, David. Really together. Beyond the limitations of flesh and blood." The chanting grew louder, and David realized that the modern-dressed figures around the grove weren't quite human anymore. Their movements were too fluid. Their eyes reflected light like an animal's, and when they opened their mouths to sing, he could see too many teeth. Whatever these people were once, they're not anymore. And if I refuse? Then you leave, the cult leader said. Walk back through the forest to your truck, drive home to your empty apartment, and spend the rest of your life wondering if you chose cowardice over love. But Jessica dies. Jessica transforms. The only question is whether she does it with guidance and support, or alone and afraid. David looked at Jessica's unconscious form, then at Melissa's too pale face, then at the circle of things that had once been human. 3 years of trauma and grief and unanswered questions had led him to this moment, this impossible choice between sanity and hope. The chanting reached a crescendo, and Jessica's eyes fluttered open. She looked directly at David with an expression of absolute terror. "Help me," she whispered. David made his choice. The end. What really happened in the Olympic National Forest? Was it supernatural horror, trauma-induced psychosis, or an elaborate cult manipulation? The truth, like the forest itself, remains dark and deep. Follow for more supernatural forest horror. My name is Christopher, and I saw Ashley for the last time 3 meters ahead of me on the trail before she simply disappeared. It was October 14th, 2018, and I'd been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 17 years. 17 years of successful rescues, of bringing lost hikers home to their families, of never losing anyone on my watch. That streak ended at 2:47 p.m. on the Hoh River Trail, when Ashley Brennan vanished into thin air while I was escorting her back to the trailhead. She'd been reported missing the night before by her college roommates. 21 years old, brunette wearing a red North Face jacket and carrying a blue Jansport backpack. Standard search and rescue. I'd found her sitting by Miller Creek, seemingly unharmed, claiming she'd gotten turned around in the fog. Relief flooded through me as I radioed base. Ranger Station, this is Unit 47. I've located the missing hiker. Ashley Brennan is safe and uninjured. Escorting her back to Trailhead Alpha now. The radio crackled back with Sarah's voice from dispatch. Copy that, Christopher. Great work. ETA? 45 minutes, I replied, watching Ashley adjust her backpack straps. She seemed perfectly normal, a little embarrassed, grateful for the help. Just another successful rescue to add to my record. We'd been hiking for maybe 20 minutes when I noticed the silence. No bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush. Even the ever-present sound of the Hoh River seemed muted. In my experience, animals going quiet usually meant predators nearby, mountain lions or bears. I instinctively moved closer to Ashley. Stay close, I told her, my hand moving to the bear spray on my belt. Something's got the wildlife spooked. She nodded, her brown eyes scanning the towering Sitka spruces that formed a cathedral ceiling above us. The October afternoon light filtered through the canopy in pale, slanted beams that seemed to bend at wrong angles. That's when my radio crackled to life with a burst of static so loud it made us both jump. Christopher? Christopher, can you hear me? The voice was faint, distorted, but unmistakably female. I grabbed the radio from my belt, frowning at the display. The signal strength showed full bars, but something was wrong with the audio quality. This is Ranger Christopher, go ahead. Christopher, I'm lost. I can't find the trail. Please help me. I glanced at Ashley, who was staring at my radio with a strange expression. This is Ranger Christopher, I repeated into the device. What's your location? Static filled the airwaves for several seconds before the voice returned clearer now. I'm near the big fallen log, the one that crosses the creek. Do you know where that is? My blood went cold. There were dozens of fallen logs crossing various creeks throughout the park. The description was too vague, too generic. Standard protocol required specific landmarks or GPS coordinates. No experienced hiker would give such useless location data. I need more specific information, I said into the radio. Can you see any trail markers? Do you have GPS coordinates? Please. I'm so scared. It's getting dark and I hear things moving in the trees. Ashley grabbed my arm. Christopher, she whispered urgently. We need to go. Now. I looked at her, surprised by the fear in her voice. "It's just someone who needs help. It's my job." "That voice," she interrupted, her grip tightening on my jacket. "Don't you recognize it?" Before I could ask what she meant, the radio squawked again. "Christopher, why aren't you helping me? I thought you cared about people." The voice was becoming more distinct, more familiar. My stomach dropped as recognition dawned. It sounded like... No, it couldn't be. "Sarah?" I called into the radio. "Sarah, is that you? This isn't proper radio protocol." Laughter echoed from the speaker. Cold, hollow laughter that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Oh, Christopher, you still don't understand, do you?" Ashley was pulling at my sleeve now, trying to drag me down the trail. "We have to leave," she hissed. "Right now." The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was crystal clear. "Christopher, it's me. It's Ashley. I'm lost and I need you to come find me." I stared at the device in my hand, then looked at Ashley standing beside me. She had gone pale, her eyes wide with terror. "That's impossible," I whispered. The Ashley next to me shook her head frantically. "It's not me, I'm right here. Christopher, that thing is using my voice." But the radio continued. "Why won't you come get me, Christopher? I'm all alone and scared. Please don't leave me here." My training kicked in. Hoax calls were rare but not unheard of. Kids with CB radios sometimes tried to prank rangers, but the voice was perfect, identical to the young woman standing beside me down to the slight tremor when she was nervous. "Someone's playing games," I said, more to reassure myself than Ashley. "Probably just... Christopher?" The radio voice had changed again. Now it sounded like my wife, Jennifer. "Christopher, where are you? Emma's sick and she's asking for Daddy. You need to come home." My hands were shaking as I keyed the mic. "Jennifer? How did you get on the Ranger frequency?" "Please come home, honey. Emma has a fever and she won't stop crying for you." Emma, my 8-year-old daughter. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every subtle accent that Jennifer had picked up growing up in Portland. But my wife didn't even know how to use a radio, let alone access Ranger frequencies. Ashley was backing away from me now, her face a mask of pure terror. "Christopher, look at me. Look at my lips, I'm not talking." But the voice that sounded exactly like Ashley continued to pour from the radio. "I found something, Christopher. Something terrible. There are bones here. So many bones. I think this is where they bring people." "Who?" I demanded, fighting the growing panic in my chest. "Who brings people where?" "The ones who live in the static," the Ashley voice replied. "They've been waiting for you, Christopher. They know your name. They know your family." The radio went silent for a moment, then Jennifer's voice returned. "Christopher, I'm scared. There's someone at the door and they're trying to get in. They say they know where you are." I was hyperventilating now, my 17 years of experience crumbling in the face of something impossible. I fumbled for my cell phone, trying to call Jennifer, but there was no signal. There was never cell signal this deep in the forest. "This isn't real," I said aloud, as much to convince myself as Ashley. "Someone's hacking the radio frequency. It's some kind of technology I don't understand." But Ashley wasn't listening. She was staring at something behind me, her mouth open in a silent scream. I turned and saw what had captured her attention. About 50 yards up the trail, a figure was walking toward us. It was a woman in a red North Face jacket, carrying a blue JanSport backpack. She looked exactly like Ashley. I looked back at the Ashley beside me, then at the approaching figure, both identical down to the smallest detail. "Christopher," came the voice from my radio, perfectly synchronized with the approaching woman's lips. "I've been looking for you. Why did you leave me?" The Ashley next to me grabbed my hand. Her palm was ice cold and trembling. "That's not me," she whispered. "Christopher, that thing isn't me." The approaching figure stopped about 20 feet away. When she spoke, her voice came from both her mouth and my radio simultaneously. "You let me disappear, Christopher. You were supposed to protect me. "I found you," I said weakly. "You're right here. I found you." Both Ashleys spoke in unison now, their voices creating an eerie harmony. "Which one of us is real, Christopher? How can you tell? How can you ever be sure?" If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Christopher's situation? Comment below. My radio erupted with voices. Dozens of them. All people I knew. Jennifer, Emma, my partner Rick, dispatcher Sarah, my father who'd been dead for 3 years. All talking at once, all calling my name, all begging for help. "Christopher, save us. Christopher, we're lost. Christopher, why won't you answer? Christopher, they're coming for your family next." I ripped the radio from my belt and hurled it against a tree. The plastic casing shattered, but the voices continued, now seeming to come from the air around me. "It's in my head," I gasped, pressing my palms against my ears. "It's inside my head." Both Ashleys were advancing on me now, moving with identical steps, identical expressions of false concern. As they drew closer, I could see that neither cast a shadow on the forest floor. "You can't run from the frequency, Christopher," they said in stereo. "It follows you everywhere. Every radio, every phone, every electronic device. We're in all of them now." I stumbled backward, my boot catching on a root. As I fell, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The Ashley I'd been talking to, the one I'd thought was real, was starting to flicker like a bad television signal. Her edges were becoming indistinct, static-filled. "Oh, God," I whispered. "You're not real either." The flickering Ashley smiled, and her teeth were made of writhing static. "Very good, Christopher, you're learning. The real Ashley disappeared yesterday, just like all the others. We've been wearing her voice, her face, leading you deeper into our territory." I scrambled to my feet and ran. Behind me, laughter echoed through the forest, not just from the Ashley figures, but from every tree, every shadow, every surface that could potentially hide a speaker. The entire forest had become a massive radio, broadcasting my terror back at me. I ran blindly through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my uniform, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My radio training told me to head downhill toward the river, but every direction looked the same. The trees seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, creating new paths that led deeper into the wilderness. After what felt like hours, I collapsed against a massive Douglas fir, my chest burning. In the silence, I could hear it again, the faint sound of radio static coming from somewhere nearby. I looked around frantically until I spotted it. An old, rusted radio sitting on a moss-covered log about 10 feet away. The kind from the 1950s, with a large antenna and analog dials. It definitely hadn't been there moments before. As I watched, the radio's dial began to move on its own, scanning through frequencies. Each station it passed produced a brief snippet of sound. "Christopher, where are you? Help me, I'm trapped. Your daughter is asking for her daddy. We have Ashley, come and get her." The dial settled on a frequency, and Jennifer's voice came through clear as day. "Christopher, thank God you're there. Listen to me carefully. Emma is missing. She walked out of the house an hour ago and I can't find her anywhere. The police are looking, but... Christopher, she was talking about you. She said she could hear Daddy calling for help on her walkie-talkie." My heart nearly stopped. Emma had a little pink walkie-talkie she'd gotten for her birthday. Jennifer and I had laughed about how she liked to pretend she was a ranger like Daddy. "Christopher, I found a note in her room, in her handwriting. It says, 'Gone to help Daddy in the forest.' Christopher, how could she know where you are?" I stumbled toward the radio, my hands shaking. Jennifer, if this is really you, you need to lock the doors. Don't let Emma out of your sight." But the frequency had changed again. Now it was Emma's small, frightened voice. "Daddy? Daddy, I can hear you, but I can't see you. Where are you? It's getting dark and I'm scared." Tears were streaming down my face. "Emma? Emma, where are you, baby?" "I'm in the forest, Daddy, just like you. A nice lady told me you needed help. She looked just like the missing girl from TV. She said you were hurt and calling for me. The pieces clicked together in my mind with horrible clarity. The entity didn't just mimic voices. It could project them through any radio frequency, anywhere. It had used my voice to lure Emma out of the house, just like it had used Ashley's voice to lead me deeper into the forest. "Emma, listen to Daddy very carefully," I said into the ancient radio, praying she could hear me. "That lady isn't real. You need to run home right now. Run as fast as you can." "But Daddy, she says you're hurt. She says you need me to come help you, just like you help other people." The voice changed again, becoming cold and alien. "She's ours now, Christopher. Just like Ashley, just like all the others who thought they were rescuing someone. Your daughter will make such beautiful sounds when we add her voice to our collection." Pure rage flooded through me, burning away the fear and confusion. This thing, whatever it was, had my daughter. The same protective instinct that had driven me to become a ranger, to spend my life saving others, now focused to a laser point. I grabbed the radio and smashed it against the tree. Sparks flew and the metal casing cracked, but Emma's voice continued to emanate from the broken device. "Daddy, why won't you come get me? I'm scared and alone." "Because you're not my daughter," I growled. "My daughter is safe at home with her mother." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. What if it really was Emma? What if the entity had somehow transported her here? What if I was condemning my own child by not following the voice? The broken radio laughed with Jennifer's voice. "How can you be sure, Christopher? How can you ever be sure of anything again? Every phone call could be us, every radio transmission, every voice you hear for the rest of your life. We're in the frequency now, Christopher. We're everywhere." I closed my eyes and tried to think like a ranger, not a terrified father. The entity fed on doubt, on the inability to distinguish truth from lies. It wanted me confused, panicked, making desperate decisions. But there was one thing it couldn't fake: silence. I turned off my handheld radio and removed the battery. I pulled out my cell phone and turned it off completely. I even took off my wristwatch, which had a small radio receiver for atomic time synchronization. In the sudden electronic silence, the forest returned to normal. Bird calls resumed in the distance. The sound of the Ho River became audible again. Without the constant chatter of false voices, I could think clearly for the first time in hours. I had been heading northwest away from the main trail. The river was to my south. If I followed it downstream, I would eventually reach the road. From there, I could get to a landline phone and call Jennifer to make sure Emma was safe. But as I started walking, I heard something that made me freeze. Actual human voices calling my name, not from a radio or hidden speaker, but real people shouting through the trees. "Christopher, Christopher, where are you?" It was Rick's voice, my partner, and Sarah from dispatch, and what sounded like a full search and rescue team. My first instinct was relief. Backup had arrived. But then I remembered, the entity could perfectly mimic any voice. How could I tell if these were real rescuers or more phantoms? I climbed up onto a large boulder to get a better view. Through the trees, I could see flashlight beams moving in a coordinated search pattern. If it was the entity, it was putting on an incredibly detailed performance. "Over here," I shouted. "Rick, Sarah, I'm over here." The flashlight beams immediately turned in my direction, and within minutes, I could see my colleagues hiking toward me through the undergrowth. Rick was in the lead, wearing his standard ranger uniform and carrying his emergency pack. Sarah was behind him with the radio equipment. 3 other rangers I recognized brought up the rear. "Jesus Christ, Christopher," Rick called out as he approached. "We've been looking for you for 6 hours. Dispatch lost contact and your GPS transponder went dead." 6 hours? It felt like I'd been in the forest for maybe 2 hours, but my watch was in my pocket, turned off so I had no way to verify the time. "The girl," I said as Rick reached me. "Ashley Brennan. Did you find her?" Rick's expression grew confused. "Christopher, what are you talking about?" "Ashley Brennan was found yesterday. She's been in the hospital since last night. Severe hypothermia and dehydration. Her family reported that she was talking about seeing a ranger in the forest. but she was delirious from exposure. My legs nearly gave out. Yesterday, but I found her today. I was escorting her back when... When what? Sarah asked, setting down her radio equipment. I looked at the radio rig and felt my stomach clench. Don't turn that on, I said quickly. Whatever you do, don't turn on any radios. Rick and Sarah exchanged glances. Christopher, Rick said gently. How do you think we found you? We've been coordinating the search by radio all day. All day? I was losing my grip on reality again. What time is it? Sarah checked her watch. Nearly 9 p.m. The sun set an hour ago. I looked up and realized she was right. The forest was dark, illuminated only by their flashlights. How had I missed the transition from day to night? Christopher, Rick said, his voice taking on the careful tone people use with mental patients. You radioed in this morning that you'd found Ashley Brennan. But when dispatch tried to get an update, all they heard was static. We've been searching for you since noon. This morning? I stared at him in confusion. No, that's wrong. I found her this afternoon. We were walking back and then the radio started. I trailed off as the implications hit me. If Ashley had been found yesterday, if I'd been missing all day, if everything I remembered was wrong. The entity, I whispered. It's been playing with my memory. It's been showing me things that aren't real. Rick stepped closer, his expression concerned. Entity? Christopher, what entity? Before I could answer, Sarah's radio crackled to life. Rick? Sarah? This is base station. We've got a problem. We just received a distress call from Christopher's daughter. Emma Brennan says her father is calling for help from somewhere in the forest. My blood turned to ice. Emma's last name isn't Brennan, I said slowly. It's Morgan. Emma Morgan. Sarah keyed her radio. Base station, please repeat. Did you say Emma Brennan? Negative. Emma Morgan. She's 8 years old and claims her father contacted her on her toy walkie-talkie asking for help. Her mother is frantic. The radio fell silent. Then Jennifer's terrified voice came through. Please, you have to find him. Emma says Christopher is trapped somewhere and that bad people are trying to hurt him. She's been talking to him for hours on that damn toy, but every time I try to take it away, she screams that Daddy needs her help. Rick and Sarah were staring at me with growing alarm. Christopher, Rick said carefully. Your daughter's name is Emma Morgan, right? I nodded, unable to speak. And the missing hiker was Ashley Brennan? Another nod. So, why did you just say Emma's last name was Brennan? I hadn't realized I'd said that. The entity was still in my head, still mixing up reality and fiction, still making me question everything I knew to be true. Sarah's radio crackled again. We need all units to return to base immediately. We've got multiple reports of false distress calls coming from different parts of the forest. Hikers are calling in voices asking for help. But when we send teams to investigate, there's no one there. Also, the voice continued, we've had 3 rangers go missing in the last hour while investigating these calls. Last radio contact placed them all in Grid 7, which is approximately 2 miles from Christopher's last known position. Rick grabbed the radio from Sarah. Base station, this is Rick. We've found Christopher and he's safe. We're bringing him out now. Negative, Rick. Christopher is already here at base station. He returned 20 minutes ago reporting that the Ashley Brennan situation was resolved. The forest went completely silent. Even the insects stopped their chirping. Rick, Sarah, and the other rangers were staring at me with expressions of dawning horror. If Christopher is at base station, Sarah whispered, then who the hell are you? Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Ashley. I read every single one. I felt my face, my hands, my body. Everything felt real and solid. I'm Christopher, I said desperately. I'm the real Christopher. That thing at base station is the entity. It's impersonating me. But as the words left my mouth, I realized the terrible truth. I had no way to prove who I was. No way to distinguish myself from a perfect supernatural copy. For all I knew, I was the copy, implanted with false memories of a life that belonged to someone else. The entity had won. It had created a scenario where truth became impossible to determine, where every voice could be a lie, where even my own identity was in question. Rick was backing away from me now, his hand moving toward his emergency radio. "Base station," he said slowly. "We need immediate backup at Grid 7. We have a situation." "Copy that, Rick. Christopher is standing right here if you want to talk to him." A voice came through the radio that was unmistakably mine. "Rick, thank God you found someone. I've been worried sick. That person you're with, they're not who they claim to be. I've been trying to track down this thing all day. It's been impersonating missing hikers to lure rangers into the forest." "No," I said, my voice breaking. "That's not me. I'm me. I'm Christopher Morgan. My wife is Jennifer. My daughter is Emma. She's 8 years old and she loves to pretend she's a ranger. We live on Cedar Street in Port Angeles. My badge number is 2847. Rick spoke into the radio. "Christopher, what's your badge number?" 2847, came the immediate reply in my voice. "Rick, be very careful. This entity can access memories, personal information, everything. It's been studying me all day." Sarah was slowly reaching for her sidearm. "Christopher," she said to me, "what was the last thing you said to your wife this morning before leaving for work?" I searched my memory desperately. I told her I'd be home for dinner, that I wouldn't miss Emma's soccer practice. The radio crackled. That's exactly what it would say. "Rick, Emma doesn't have soccer practice on Mondays. She has piano lessons." The real Christopher would never forget that. My heart sank. Piano lessons. Emma had piano lessons on Monday. How could I have forgotten something so basic about my own daughter's schedule? Unless I wasn't the real Christopher. Unless I was just a collection of stolen memories and false experiences, created by something that didn't quite understand the details of human life. "I don't know what's real anymore," I whispered, sinking to my knees. Rick kept his radio keyed. "Christopher, if you're really you, what did Emma give you for Father's Day last year?" Silence stretched for several seconds before my voice came through the speaker. "A coffee mug she made in art class. It said World's Best Daddy and had her handprint on it." I stared at the radio in horror. That was exactly right. But I remembered it too. We both had the same memories. "Rick," the radio continued in my voice, "ask it about the scar on my left shoulder. The real Christopher would know how he got it." Sarah trained her flashlight on my left shoulder. Through my ranger shirt, the outline of an old scar was barely visible. I remembered getting it as a child, falling off my bike and catching my shoulder on a broken fence post. "Bike accident when I was 9, I said. Caught my shoulder on a fence post trying to avoid hitting Mrs. Henderson's cat. The radio response was immediate. "See? It knows everything about me. But here's something only the real Christopher would know. What did I find in Emma's backpack last week that I didn't tell Jennifer about?" My mind went blank. I had no memory of finding anything in Emma's backpack, let alone keeping it secret from Jennifer. "A pregnancy test," the radio voice continued. "Jennifer doesn't know about it yet. I've been trying to figure out how to handle the situation." The words hit me like a physical blow. Emma was only 8 years old. Why would she have, unless someone had given it to her, or she'd found it somewhere, or... I realized I was thinking about it wrong. The entity was making things up, creating false scenarios to confuse the real rescue team. Or maybe I was the false one, and the real Christopher was desperately trying to prove his identity from base station. "None of this is real," I said aloud. "The pregnancy test, the perfect memories, the identical scars. You're creating all of it. You're making us doubt everything." Rick and Sarah were now flanking me, their weapons drawn but not yet pointed in my direction. They were trained professionals trying to handle an impossible situation. "Rick," the radio said in my voice, "it's right about one thing. Nothing can be trusted anymore. This entity has corrupted everything. Radio frequencies, memories, even physical evidence. There's only one way to end this. What? Rick asked. You have to destroy all radio equipment in the forest. Every radio, every cell phone, every electronic device. Cut off its ability to communicate. Then it'll be trapped in whatever form it's currently wearing. I felt a chill of recognition. The entity wasn't trying to prove its identity. It was trying to eliminate all electronic communication so it could operate without interference. Don't listen to it, I said urgently. It wants you to destroy the radios because that's how it spreads. Through radio frequencies. If you cut off communication, you'll be isolated and vulnerable. Exactly what it would say. The radio responded immediately. Rick, Sarah, think about it. Has anything made sense since you started using radios to coordinate this search? How many false calls have you received? How many voices have led you in circles? Sarah lowered her radio slightly. It has a point. We've been getting dozens of fake distress calls all day. Maybe if we shut down electronic communication. No, I said desperately. That's what it wants. It's trying to isolate you so it can pick you off one by one. Your only protection is staying in contact with base station. But even as I said it, I wondered if I was wrong. Maybe the electronic silence was the answer. Maybe the entity could only function through radio waves and electronic devices. The terrible truth was that there was no way to know. The entity had created a perfect paradox where any action could be right or wrong, where trust was impossible, where even my own thoughts might not be my own. Last test, the radio said in my voice. Rick, remember what we talked about last Christmas at the station party? About why I really became a ranger? Rick nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember. Then you know what I'm going to ask you to do. Rick's face went pale in the flashlight beam. He raised his sidearm and pointed it directly at my chest. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. But the real Christopher told me that if we ever encountered something like this, something that could perfectly mimic people, there was only one way to be sure. What are you talking about? I asked, backing away from the gun. He made me promise, Rick continued, tears streaming down his face. If I ever had to choose between two Christophers, I should shoot the one standing in front of me, because the real Christopher would never put me in that position. He'd rather die than make me choose. The radio crackled with my voice. Do it, Rick. End this thing before it hurts anyone else. I stared at my friend, my partner of 8 years, as he prepared to kill me based on the word of a voice coming through a radio speaker. The entity had orchestrated this perfectly. Whether I was real or fake, someone was going to die, and the survivor would never be certain they'd made the right choice. Rick, I said quietly, if you pull that trigger, you'll never know if you killed your friend or saved him. Is that something you can live with? His hand was shaking now, the gun wavering between my chest and the ground. Do it, the radio urged. Every second you hesitate gives it more time to corrupt your mind, to make you doubt what you know is right. Sarah stepped forward. There has to be another way. Some test that only the real Christopher would pass. But I realized there wasn't. The entity was perfect. It had all my memories, all my mannerisms, all my knowledge. The only difference was location. One Christopher was here in the forest, one was at base station. But even that proved nothing, since the entity could theoretically be in multiple places at once. Unless... Emma, I said suddenly. Call Emma directly. Not through base station, not through dispatch. Call her at home on the landline. If there's one thing the entity can't fake, it's a real conversation with someone who loves me. Rick considered this, then shook his head. But how would we know the voice we're hearing is really Emma? The entity could be simulating her too. He was right. The entity had created a closed loop of doubt where nothing could be verified, where every piece of evidence could be false, where reality itself had become unreliable. The radio spoke again in my voice. Rick, I need you to listen very carefully. The entity is about to try something new. It's going to offer you a solution that seems logical but is actually designed to help it escape. Don't trust anything it says next. I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it. Anything I said now would be dismissed as the entity's attempt to escape. The thing had managed to discredit me before I even spoke. That's when I realized the truth. It didn't matter who was real and who was fake. The entity had already won. It had destroyed trust, corrupted communication, and turned friends into enemies. Even if Rick chose correctly, even if he killed the right target, the damage was done. None of us would ever trust a radio call again. None of us would ever be certain of another person's identity. The entity hadn't just invaded our radios. It had invaded our minds, planting seeds of doubt that would grow and spread long after this night was over. I looked at Rick, still holding the gun on me, tears streaming down his face as he struggled with an impossible choice. I looked at Sarah, frantically checking and rechecking her radio equipment as if she could somehow find a frequency that hadn't been corrupted. I looked at the other Rangers, standing frozen in indecision, and I realized that this was how the entity fed, not on flesh or blood, but on confusion and doubt, on the breakdown of human trust and communication. It had turned us all into walking broadcast stations of fear and uncertainty. 10 seconds, Rick, the radio said in my voice. If you don't take the shot, I'm ordering all units to retreat and calling in federal backup. This thing cannot be allowed to leave the forest. Rick's finger moved to the trigger, and in that moment, standing in the darkness of the Olympic forest with a gun pointed at my heart, I finally understood what I had to do. I smiled at my friend and said the one thing the entity would never think to say, the one phrase that proved beyond any doubt who was real and who was fake. Rick, don't shoot, I forgive you either way. The gun lowered slowly as understanding dawned in Rick's eyes. The real Christopher would never order anyone to kill. The real Christopher would understand the impossible position his friend was in. The real Christopher would forgive. The radio went silent for the first time in hours, and in that silence, I heard something beautiful. Emma's real voice calling my name from somewhere in the forest, not from a speaker or radio, but echoing through the trees as she and Jennifer searched for me with flashlights and love. Daddy! Daddy! Where are you? I ran toward my daughter's voice, leaving the static and lies behind, my family's love guiding me home through the darkness. The phantom frequency could mimic any voice, steal any memory, corrupt any signal, but it could never replicate the one thing that truly mattered, the pure, uncorrupted love between a father and his child. That frequency was mine alone. End of transmission.